dressed himself up as a homeless person. And when he went into their church, no one greeted him, and he asked a couple people for money, and nobody would give him money. And he actually went down and sat in the first row, and some of the greeters walked down and asked him, sir, you can't sit there. And so he went to the back row. And what people didn't know is his elders were in on this. And so they were going to introduce their new pastor that day to the church. And so as one of the elders walked up and introduced the pastor, this person came walking up, this homeless person from the back, and it just happened to be this church's new pastor. And to make a long story short, the pastor actually go ahead and just released church and said, come back in another week, because he said, you guys are not disciples. And so, one of the things is to suspend judgment. The second class that I taught in the Bible study was all on discipleship. Because when you think about discipleship, you think of how we have to act as a church. Now, there's elders and there's younger people. And one of the things that I brought up is, the younger people are more towards like the visionaries. And then the elder people are more wiser. So, one of the things we can do, and one of the things that I did, and I'll touch on in a few more minutes, is we can seek Scripture, and we can seek knowledge through biblical matters. And one of the things in seminary that we have done is you learn about theology, that's obvious, you learn about Scripture, but one of the things that seminary wasn't sure about was science. And that's been something that I've been kind of really interested in. And so, but with the postmodernism, there's a lot of people that think the church is kind of going downhill. And in seminary, I kind of would argue back with the teachers and say, I'm not too sure about that. Because if you look at how the younger generation now, compared to back in the 80s when I was first baptized, it's grown substantially. If you look at like the concerts that go on, Kathy and I went and we saw Casting Crowns a few months back, and every year they have the Passion. If you go on the internet or go on YouTube and look up the Passion, they literally have in different cities and it's mainly the younger generation. There'll be 300,000 people that travel for a 3-day event. And that's why in seminary, when they were saying, no, the postmodernism is really messing up the church, a lot of times I would say, I don't see that, I really see the younger generation and even our audience here as the people that are going to lead the way. And so for a church, that's something that we really have to try to let them do. Because in 10, 15 years from now, what's going to happen to Linda? Is it going to be the younger generation? Kathy and I, where she came from Pewaukee, she gave me a tour and showed me 2 churches that closed. Why do churches close? I just thought about how can a church close? And then I thought, well, maybe it happened because there wasn't a change. Or maybe change wasn't allowed. And change is crucial right now with Christianity. It's changing substantially. But I talked about pride, and I got a slide because we know, I think it's the next one, we know that God hates pride. And hate is something that I tell my kids not to say, because hate is a very strong word. So, but if you look at James 4:6, it talks about pride. I'm not going to read this slide verbatim, but it talks about being proud. The second one, how many kids do we have in here? I think the second one is really something kids should pay attention to, where it says, you who are younger, submit yourselves to your elders with humility towards one another. So that's a very good verse for the younger generation. But the third one, Proverbs 3:10, it says, "But wisdom is found in those who take advice." You know, and it's gotten to the point where even with my kids, like I have a 24 and a 30-year-old, where I won't even give them advice because they don't want to take it. And I don't know if you see this with your kids, grandkids or whatever, but it just seems like people do not want to take advice anymore, and people don't want to give advice. But this is biblical, you know. As elders, as wise elders, we're supposed to give advice. But what can you do as a person to kind of help the church, or help bring up our younger generation into the church? Pastor John Jenkins from First Baptist Church in Glenarden, I like what he said because he gave an example of what's called carefrontation. That's what he uses at his church. Whenever somebody comes in, they immediately surround them and they steer them in the right direction. They give them care. He also mentions a story about it's a goat story. And he talks about when two mountain goats are going up and down a mountain on a really narrow trail and they get stuck, one of them will actually lay down and then the other one will crawl over or crawl down. You know, as an elder or as a younger person, who's going to be the one to bow down? You know? So it's a good question. The main thing is we disciple. But I think the most significant thing, and when we talk about resolution and a long-term resolution, is we have to be humbled in our lives. I think humility is, when it comes to finding your way with God, is probably the most important thing, one of the most important things that can happen to you. And I want to share some of the things that's happened to me, and I don't want to share them in a way where it brings pity or anything like that. And I don't want to share it in a way that you know, looks like I'm boasting, but I just want to share it so you could see some of the things that I've gone through and how the Lord has changed my life. When I was 5 years old, my father, I woke up one morning and he was being taken out on a gurney. When I was 14, I went out surfing with a friend, and it was on a very big day, and I shouldn't have gone out. And we decided that we were going to go down the beach where we thought it was flatter. There weren't very many waves, but as we started to paddle out, we found out that it was a riptide that we actually were paddling out in, and it made it flat. But then the riptide took us out about 3/4 of a mile in the ocean, and 12 waves came in that were anywhere from 20 to 25 feet, which is higher than this building. And literally, as a teenager, as a 14-year-old kid, I cried for God. I literally thought I was going to die. And about 4 waves had passed me, and I decided my only way of living was going to be to try to go down one of these waves, try to ride one of these waves. And what happened is when I paddled to get on the wave sucked me up, and I actually went over the wave. And when the wave landed, I had a leash that was connected to my leg. The leash actually broke, and it was a lifetime guaranteed leash, okay? When the wave knocked me under, it knocked me so deep. Normally your lifeline is to be able to touch the bottom, because you can push yourself off from the bottom. I couldn't touch the bottom. And so my leash broke. I found out later when I went in that my board, a brand new, this is in like 1978, $275 surfboard, which would be about $1,000 surfboard today, broke in half. I mean, that's how powerful the waves were. But as this wave crushed me, you're in like a washing machine, and I was tumbling. And after all the tumbling stopped, I can remember I was so deep in the water that I looked up and I could see the sun setting on the water. And it was beautiful, but I didn't have any more breath. And I didn't know how I was going to get there. And I blacked out. And I saw darkness, which really scared me. But through God's grace, I don't know what happened. I reached the surface and I was able to get a breath. And as soon as I reached the surface, another wave hit me, but fortunately I was able to feel the ground. And then I felt the ground and I pushed myself up and I thanked God. I think that was the first day that I really called out to God. I was humbled in 1988 at an air show that I was at. And I showed, because there's kids here, I can't show the video, but I showed it in the Sunday school. My ex-wife and myself and my son Brett, he was about a year old. We went to an air show at Ramstein Air Force Base. And we had worked our way all the way up to the flight line where the planes take off. And there was an Italian team which was